Hey guys, what's up? James here. So let's hop right into it. While you have been doing your own personal research into whether or not an investment into a psychedelic stock is a good idea, you have probably heard the refrain of, "It's a long-term investment," probably dozens, if not hundreds of times. Heck, on this channel in our 100 videos. I myself have probably said that several hundred times, and if you include all the articles I've written, which by the way you can go check out at psychedelicspotlight.com, it's probably close to 500 times. However, even if you believe in the thesis for investing in psychedelic medicines, us as investors probably need a little bit more of a specific time frame than "it's a long-term investment." So in this video, I aim to answer that question. Just how long-term are we talking? Or to put it a little bit more eloquently, what is the time frame for a psychedelic investment to pay off? Or, translated to Reddit speak, when moon? Now, before I get into answering the different major catalysts and timestamps that I am expecting, I feel like I have to start with a little bit of a disclaimer in that the answer to this question could be never? Now, look, I do personally believe in the thesis, as I'm sure all you guys know. I've done 100 videos on it, but we need to be realistic here. We are talking about a highly speculative field. We are looking at the scientific data that's coming out that's showing that, say, MDMA can treat PTSD with 67% effectiveness, if not 88% effectiveness. And we are speculating that the companies that are working on these compounds will disrupt the traditional pharmaceutical industry when it comes to mental health care, and then we'll be able to make a grand profit on it. And of course, I do actually believe in this, but we need to be careful. So the only thing I'm trying to say here, guys, and of course, nothing in this video is investment advice, but this comes pretty close to it. Be responsible with your money. Don't go all in on this sector or anything. Just recognize that it is a speculative bet, and it still might be a good bet to make. I'm making the bet. Many other people are making the bet, but just be responsible with your money. Alrighty, with that little bit of a disclaimer out of the way that I see it is that there are two really big turning points for the entire psychedelic medicines industry and psychedelic stocks that will come over the next handful of years, if not 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Now, the two really big turning points that I see are as follows. First, the legalization of certain classical psychedelics, specifically MDMA and psilocybin, to treat specific mental health ailments, in this case, PTSD and depression. This is going to happen relatively soon. The next major turning point will be the legalization of next-generation psychedelics tailor-made to treat specific ailments. And that's going to come quite a bit of time after that. So in this video, we're going to look at both of these catalysts, both of these turning points for the psychedelics industry. But first, I wanted to ask you guys a question. Did you know that we have a newsletter that goes out every single Friday for giving psychedelic stock tips and just going over all of the news of the psychedelics industry over the past week? We call it the Psychedelic Stock Tip Newsletter. And I'm sure, actually, probably because I've literally never talked about this on the channel before, I'm sure that most of you guys don't know about it. So I'm going to go ahead and put a link down in the description. It's super great. You guys should definitely check it out. Like I said, we go through all the major events that happened in the past week when it comes to psychedelic medicines. I don't really have enough time to make videos on all of it, so you guys only really get one big happening per week on this video. So definitely check out the newsletter because you'll understand everything that happens throughout the week. We take a look at all the different companies in the sector, see which ones did best, see which ones did the worst. You get to see all the articles that I have written over at Psychedelic Spotlight. So definitely make sure you check it out. Like I said, I'll put the link in the description, and you know what? Let's go wild. I'll even put it in the pinned comment. So just go down and click on that link to sign up for the newsletter. All right, with that shameless self-promotion out of the way, let's hop into the two different turning points that we're talking about. So the first one was the legalization of certain classical psychedelics in very specific circumstances. Specifically, we're talking about MDMA therapy to treat PTSD and psilocybin therapy to treat depression. Now, this is actually going to happen very soon. In fact, if you listen to Rick Doblin, who is really one of the world's biggest, what's the right word? I'm totally blanking on the word, guys. Authority, that's the word. One of the world's biggest authorities in the psychedelics world. He actually says that MDMA therapy to legalize, MDMA therapy to treat PTSD is going to be legalized before the end of 2023. Now, I know time seems to be moving pretty quickly, but last time I looked at a calendar, guys, we're 2022 right now. That is 1 year away, or maybe a year and a half away, because we have until the end of 2023. And he expects that the legalization of psilocybin to treat depression will come a year after that, so 2024, maybe 2025. Now, he's not just pulling random dates out of the hat here, because the process that these drugs are going to follow to get legalized is already set in stone. We don't need Republicans and Democrats to come together and hold hands in the Senate to pass this legislation. No. This is in the hands of the FDA, and all that these medicines need to do in order to get legalized is pass 2 phase 3 clinical trials and have effectiveness rates higher than current treatments. And if you look at the current studies, so for example, we already have 1 phase 3 trial out on MDMA to treat PTSD. I talked about it a little bit earlier. It showed that 67% of people were essentially cured, people with severe PTSD, and 88% of people saw their symptoms decrease by 88%. So we just need 1 more phase 3 trial, which is about to get started, by the way. And if we see similar results to that, then it's only a matter of time very soon before MDMA therapy for PTSD gets legalized. When talking about psilocybin therapy to treat depression, we're a little bit further behind. They finished a phase 2B trial. We're probably going to have a few more phase 2 trials and then a couple phase 3 trials. So we're looking at 2025 for the legalization of psilocybin therapy to treat depression. But again, that is still very soon, guys. So that's the first turning point for the psychedelic medicines industry. Now, who is this going to help? Well, it's going to help 2 specific subsets of psychedelic medicines companies, of psychedelic stocks. And that is the producers and the clinics, for pretty obvious reasons. The clinics, because that is where people are actually going to go to get treated. If you have depression and you want psilocybin therapy, you're not just going to get pills from a pharmacist. You're going to actually have to go to these brick and mortar therapist locations to get the therapy. So the clinics and companies that run clinics are going to be the first genre of psychedelic medicines companies that benefits. The second are going to be the producers of the medicines, the people that actually physically make the MDMA, the people that physically make the psilocybin. Again, it's somewhat obvious, but it still needs to be said. So one company that could really benefit from this first round of legalization would be Numinus, because they both create their own medicines and they run their own clinics. They run their clinics under the brand of Mindspace, and then they create their own psilocybin, natural psilocybin. They also have a partnership with MAPS to treat PTSD using MDMA. So they're kind of a clear-cut winner in this first round of legalization. Of course, there will be others as well. Now, despite this being basically a universal positive for the psychedelic medicines industry to happen in, let's call it 2 years' time, let's be a little bit conservative. Let's call it 3 years' time. Let's bake in some delays that I'm sure will happen. So this first kind of turning point is 3 years' time, but there are some, let's call them limiting factors for how beneficial this first round of legalization will be. So we're looking at clinics and producers. Let's start with the clinics. So on the clinic side, they will be limited by how quickly they can scale. So we've talked about this on the program before. One of the limiting factors with psychedelic medicines is the fact that it's going to take a hell of a long time to train the literal tens of thousands of individuals, of therapists, in how to properly conduct a psychedelic therapy session. You can't just do that overnight. That is going to take literal years to train these therapists. And then plus, we need to actually set up thousands, if not tens of thousands, of brick and mortar therapy places. I'm forgetting what they're called. Therapist offices. That will work for now. We're going to need to set up tens of thousands of these across the country, across North America, and eventually across the world. That is going to take time. So yeah, we're going to see lots of competition in this area, but they're not going to be limited by competition. They're going to be limited by who has the best access or the most access to these therapists. On the producer's side, we're going to see a very different limiting factor. when it comes to the first round of legalization of psychedelic medicines. This is going to be competition in who can create these compounds cheaper. So MDMA and psilocybin, they're not particularly difficult to make. Especially MDMA, like MDMA is MDMA is MDMA. If MDMA gets legalized to treat PTSD, everybody's going to be making the same MDMA. The only thing these dozens of different companies can really compete on will be who can make the MDMA and sell the MDMA for cheaper. The only thing they can really compete on is costs. And like I already said, making MDMA, not that difficult. So we're going to have dozens of companies competing to see who can create the MDMA for cheaper. There won't necessarily be a winner-take-all. There'll probably be a floor that they all reach, and we'll have dozens of different companies supplying to different segments of the market. But unless we get some bad patents granted, I don't really see there being any real potential for a company to say like 20, 30, 40, 50x on this first round of legalization, just frankly because there's going to be so many individual companies working on it that the potential billions of dollars of market available will be split between many, many different companies. Now, don't get it twisted here, guys. This is still going to be a massive news story for the psychedelic medicines industry. I do expect many stocks when this to happen to shoot up somewhat significantly. I do expect the bottom lines of many of these companies to really, really improve and become much rosier than they are now. It's just not going to be a 0 to 100 moment that I know a lot of people are waiting for. There will also be the benefit when this happens of the narrative changing. So if you try to talk to people about psilocybin healing right now, they're probably going to look at me and be like, okay, druggie, you go back and you do some more psilocybin healing on your own time. But once this actually becomes legalized and people start receiving this therapy, the narrative will change. And that will help with the overall outlook of the psychedelic medicines industry. So that is the first turning point for the psychedelic medicines industry. It's going to happen in 2 to 3 years. However, the true turning point, the really kind of 0 to 100 moment, is going to be the advent, the legalization of next generation psychedelics that are tailor-made to treat specific ailments. So, we mentioned a second ago how under the first wave of legalization, basically the only thing these companies are going to be able to compete on is cost. Well, under the second wave of legalization, these companies will also be able to compete on effectiveness of their drugs. So let's give a little bit of an example. Let's say me and you, we are both drug producers. We are both creating a version of psilocybin. I'm company X, you're company Y. If company X is able to create a version of psilocybin that's not only cheaper than company Y's, but is also, let's say, 20% more effective in treating depression, then it doesn't matter if both of our versions of psilocybin are better than regular treatments for depression, and even if both of them are better than regular psilocybin. If my drug is more effective than everybody else's on the market, who in the heck is going to want to buy company X's drug? I mean, company Y's drug. I'm getting my metaphors all twisted here, guys, but you know what I'm trying to say. They'll be able to compete on the effectiveness of their drugs as well as on the cost. Now, I know at this point, probably some of y'all are saying, but James, psilocybin's already perfect the way it is. It is a God-given plant that has given us this wonderful fungi to give us an amazing healing experience. Why do we need to change it? And I would say, look, guys, yes, psilocybin's great. I've talked about it enough on this channel that anybody that's seen a few of my videos knows that I am an extreme advocate for psilocybin in many different forms, in medicine, legalization, what have you. But that doesn't mean it's perfect in a clinical setting. And in fact, let's just stick with the example of psilocybin here. There are a lot of serious issues with using psilocybin in a clinical setting, even if it is better than the current treatments we have. So a couple of examples are, first and foremost, the giant duration of effect of psilocybin. If you take a large dose of psilocybin, you can be tripping for like 6+ hours. And if you are paying for a therapist for 6+ hours, that is going to be extremely expensive. You're paying their salary, you're paying essentially the rent for the building for that time, for the electricity, for any profit, for the secretary, for the entire company. You are paying for 6 hours of their time. This is going to be thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars, which is going to price out way too many people. We need to shorten the duration of effect to, let's say, 2 hours. Another issue is it takes an hour to an hour to kick in. That's going to be essentially just a wasted hour that you are still paying for, but nothing is derived from it. And then finally, this is a really big one actually, the variation of effect between individuals for psilocybin. So if me and you, if we both weigh the same amount, if we're both male, if we're both lots of other things in common, and we both take the same amount of psilocybin from the same source, we can still have wildly different effects, wildly different intensity of effects, because just the nature of the drug, there is a huge variation of effect. So we need to be able to create a psilocybin where if you take X amount of it and we control for height, weight, what have you, then people are going to have relatively the same experience, which again, we just don't have with current psilocybin. One last issue with psilocybin is that some studies, I don't think this is actually super confirmed yet, but some studies have shown that there can be negative cardiovascular issues with taking psilocybin. This is actually the case for a lot of psychedelics, but that might not necessarily matter for a person that's completely healthy, that's doing psilocybin for the first time, but it could matter for somebody that already has heart issues, that already has high blood pressure. So obviously, if we can edit out the negative cardiovascular issues, then why wouldn't we? Alrighty, so when it comes to current leading companies in the psychedelic medicine field, most of them are already working on their own next generation psychedelics. So we got Cybin, MindMed, Compass Pathways, Atai, they're all working on their own next generation psychedelics. Let's go to Cybin for a second. They have a few next generation psychedelics they're working on, but the most well known at the moment is CYB003, which is a next generation psychedelic. And specifically, Cybin claims that it counteracts those issues that we talked about. So rather than a 6-hour duration, it's much shorter. I think it's around 2 hours. It kicks in quicker rather than taking an hour to kick in. And crucially, they say that the variation between individuals is less. So if Cybin's claims all end up being true, it's too early to say that for sure, but if they all do end up being true, who's going to buy regular old psilocybin for a therapy session? It would just be an inferior drug. Now, of course, many other companies are also working on next-generation psilocybin, and then also other psychedelics. So one of the most famous ones, of course, is MindMed's 18MC. It's a next-generation psychedelic based on ibogaine, which comes from this shrub in West Africa. Extremely hallucinogenic, day-plus long hallucinations, but it has been shown to be effective in treating addiction. That also has major problems with cardiovascular issues. There's also major cardiovascular issues associated with ibogaine. So MindMed says that they have a drug that is based on ibogaine, keeps the anti-addictive properties, but it edits out the hallucination and the negative cardiovascular issues. So if their claims end up being true, that is going to be a huge, huge deal. And then there's, of course, many other companies that are working on it as well. So, if these companies can get through all these different clinical stages, then best case scenario, we're looking at 5 years away. Maybe the best case scenario for 18MC, because they're already in phase 2 trials, would be closer to 3 years, but we're going to be conservative again. We're going to call it 5 years away, best case scenario. If these next generation psychedelics can make it through phase 1, 2A, 2B, 3 trials, that's going to take about 5 years for these companies. But once they do, and once we start have companies being able to compete on effectiveness of their medicines, and once we have a handful of companies that have the most effective drug for, let's say, PTSD or what have you, then these are going to be the companies that are able to 20, 30, 40x over the next decade, because they will be able to eat up a large portion of the entire market because they have the best drugs. And again, it doesn't matter if other companies have drugs that are more effective than current treatments, if they're significantly less effective than the best next generation psychedelic. And by the way, it's not necessarily going to be one company or winner takes all, because different psychedelics will work both in different indications. So like one version might be better for, say, PTSD, one version might be better for depression, but then also different population groups within one segment, different medications might work better for. But there still will be a handful of winners that take the vast majority of the entire marketplace. So basically, to the winners goes the spoils. This does get into the kind of core problem facing retail investors in the psychedelic medicine space, however, and that is being able to predict the winners in this field like 5 years in advance. And frankly, we can't do it. It's literally impossible. Maybe with the exception of some scientists that are on the boards of these companies, nobody knows whose next generation psychedelic is going to work best right now. And frankly, probably even the people in the companies, they don't know whose next generation psychedelics is going to work best. We're going to have to wait till phase 2A, 2B, and 3 trials are done, which again is going to take minimum 5 years. And by the way, I skipped a part. I say minimum 5 years because in all likelihood, everything's not going to go perfectly. We're going to see companies having to go back to the drawing board, tweak either their regimen or the dose level or the molecule itself or the setting. There are so many different variables that can be changed. So we see this for 18MC, for example. They finished their phase 1 clinical trial, but it took like twice as long as it should have because they wanted to try different dose levels. And that's okay, that's good. We're getting as much data as possible. But it's going to take longer. We're going to see with lots of these different psychedelics, companies pausing the process to tweak their formulas, to tweak their regimens, to tweak the dose levels, go back a phase to make sure that they have the best compound possible, and that's okay. So maybe instead of 5 years, it takes 8 years, but that is still okay. Anyhow, core problem, picking the winners 5 years in advance. What I was going to say is that's why I personally like ETFs. They give you the potential to invest in the entire industry. They give you the potential to invest in the entire industry. And the idea there is the gains of the winners will more than make up for the losses of the losers. So if you have, like, say, 5 companies that each 20x, that's going to make up for the companies that have in the future and then get acquired by other companies. Okay, so we got a little bit sidetracked in this episode, but to give a little bit of a recap, the main question that we were trying to answer is, what is the time frame for an investment in a psychedelic medicine? And there are 2 big turning points that are going to come in the next handful of years. The first one is the legalization of first-generation medicines, first-generation psychedelics like psilocybin and MDMA. LSD, DMT, other psychedelics will probably follow a couple years later, but the first ones are going to be MDMA to treat PTSD and psilocybin to treat depression. That is going to be the first huge turning point for psychedelic medicines and their stocks, and that will come 2 to 3 years. The next major turning point, and this is really the big turning point, will be the advent of second and third generation psychedelics, which is still minimum 5 years away. Probably more like 8 years away. And I know that seems like a long time to a lot of people, and that's because, well, it is a long time. And that's why it's called a long-term investment. But guys, that's where the most money is to be made. I'm just going to leave you guys with a quote by Warren Buffett, and I'm by no means a Warren Buffett fanboy, but it is a wise quote. He says, "The stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient." Let me repeat that. The stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. If we believe in the thesis of investing in psychedelic medicines, then we have to be patient. Just to close out the episode, guys, definitely you should go check out our newsletter. It gets released every single Friday. Again, it will have all the articles that I write throughout the week. It will have articles that other people write about psychedelic medicines throughout the week. It will have all of our videos. It will have some insights into the industry. We take a look at which stocks performed best throughout the week, which stocks performed the worst throughout the week. You definitely should make sure that you sign up for it. Again, I make like one video a week covering one subject. If you're a serious investor, that's not enough. So definitely check out the newsletter where you will be able to get all the information that you need to know that has happened throughout the week. Again, I will leave the link down below in the pinned comment, also in the description. Guys, I love you all so much. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, do all that good stuff. Hug your dog, pet your mom, other way around. But I love you guys. Peace.